and I'm sure we'll hit the ground running. I want to start just by introducing myself very briefly. I'm Dan LeClaire. I'm the CEO of the Global Business School Network, which is a group of a little more than 120 leading business schools who work with business, NGOs, governments all around the world to improve management, entrepreneurship, education in and for the developing world. Now I'm here with two, soon to be four, pioneers, leaders in the space of sustainability and management education. I'm just going to do a brief introduction, and then we're going to jump right into this plenary. Let me start with Karen. Karen is, I think it's been about a year now, right? Karen, a little more than a year, is the president and CEO of AACSB International, an organization I have a fair amount of experience with over the years. And before that, she was thrice a dean, right? 3 times a dean, last at Santa Clara, before that Florida State, and then before that Utah State. And throughout this period, she was I think one of the most prolific volunteers at AACSB, including 2 terms on the board and a term as the chair of the board. So we're so excited to have you here, Karen. And there's John Elkington. What can I say? You know, this is a pleasure to meet you. I've known at least a little about your work for many, many years, stretching back, 4 decades, stretching back over, at least 3 companies you founded and 20 books you've written. I remember reading once that Business Week referred to you as the dean of social responsibility when it comes to business. And I hear you're going to talk a little bit about coining the term triple bottom line. So we're really excited to have you here, John. You're the founder and chief pollination officer at Volans, and we're going to talk a little bit about that chief pollination, I think, as we go. And yes, we have John North. John North has been at GRLI, the Globally Responsible Leadership Initiative, for 10 years, if I recall, John, and 7 of those years as its executive director. Before that, you had your foot in business with Accenture and in academia at the University of Pretoria. Danitza, you made it, so we're a full group now. It's nice to see you, Danitza. It's nice to see you, Denise. I know we had a little trouble finding the right room. All of us did. Danitza is both the founding president and the current president at IEDC, the Bled School of Management. She also founded the CEMAN, the Central Eastern European Management Development Association, and serving now as the president of the Alliance for Management. I'm going to make sure I get this right. The Alliance for Management Development Associations in Rising Economies, which I'm sure will come up today as well. Well, without pausing any further, usually at this point you would expect the moderator to spend a little time framing the session, and normally I would do that, but we're too fortunate today to have John Elkington here, because what we've asked him to do as a panel is to basically open the session. We asked him to reflect on his experience over the last 30, 40 years, and then look ahead at the challenge that we have as educators, as people who care about the world. Look ahead to the challenge that we have. So we're gonna ask John to step up and really help open the session for us, to frame the conversation, and we're gonna build on what he has to say in our conversation in this panel. So John, I'm gonna turn it right over to you.
Well done, thank you. Can you hear me?
I can, and I'm seeing a bunch of nods. We can, and I suspect the audience can as well.
It's always worth checking, isn't it? And hi, Karen. Hi, Danica. And hello, John. Wonderful to see you all 3. And well done for getting, well, all five of us getting through the obstacle course on the way here. That was character forming, and I'm sure it'll reflect on what we're all going to discuss going forward. It's no accident in my mind that the focus has expanded from management and executive training over time, and we see this in the sort of prime language, to leadership. It's partly brand extension, you know, you want to sort of move up the sort of pecking order in a way, but it's also a reflection of what's going on in the wider world, I think, which is that we're moved, and it's a truism now to say that we're moving into disrupted times. But when I think about managers, what they do is operate an existing system, and we will need people to operate existing systems going forward. But we increasingly need people who will take apart some of those existing approaches, solutions, and so on, and replace them with radically better ones. And that's, I think, why in the last decade and a half, we've seen a lot more interest in entrepreneurs and innovators and so on. Just a public health warning before I kick off with my 5 minutes of comments. I'm not an academic. I admire academe, the academic world. I have 3 visiting professorships, but all that means is I can parachute into other people's academic environments for a day and talk to the students and run off with some interesting ones. So, I mean, I just so you know, I am actually, well, I suppose quite entrepreneurial with the sort of work that I do. And the triple bottom line, I'm not going to talk about very much at all. But Dan did ask me to set the sort of slightly wider context to what we'll be talking about going forward. And I just say something else, which is that in the last sort of 18 months or so, we've started to work a lot more with business schools and universities in different parts of the world. So UK most obviously, but Portugal, Egypt, Japan, United States, and so on. And one of the things I'm learning from that work, largely with MBA and master's level students, is that the sort of creativity that we're getting from those students now is way ahead of anything either that I expected or that I very often experienced in sort of some of the big companies that we work with. They're very willing to sort of reframe things, come at things from very different directions. So this is an exciting time, and I think the assumption people often make is that we've got to educate younger people because that's where the future lies, and I'm not disputing that for a moment. But I also think we've got to educate and re-educate older people. I'm now 71, 72 in a couple of weeks. I'm a baby boomer, and I am quite concerned that my generation, as it retires, will do what all previous generations have done, and that's become more conservative and assume that it knows how the world runs and will resist. And, you know, some of that will be direct and political, and some of it will be through pension investments and so on. The inevitable seismic shifts that are going to happen in our economies and societies. So we need to sort of educate, re-educate every generation going forward. Let me just quickly set a benchmark in a way. When I first started dealing with business schools in particular, which was in the early 80s, I remember very clearly that if you went into INSEAD or IMD or wherever it was, you would find, if you were lucky, a rogue academic, a faculty member who'd sort of elected to take on this strange new environmental or sustainability or shared value or whatever it was, circular economy agenda, and do something with it. And there'd be this little clique of students who'd come around and hover around these people. But the broad mass of faculty members just sort of, you know, whatever. I mean, if that's what you want to do, you're sacrificing your career, you're threatening our rankings as a business school, but sort of go do it. The change has been very slow, actually. I mean, I'm fascinated to hear about networks of business schools and so on that have evolved. But 10 years ago, for example, I went to the Wharton School to an event that was with 60 academics. I somehow slipped in doing sustainability work, and the dean took me aside of the school towards the end of the session, and he said, you know, this is what we will be teaching. This is exactly the framing that we need to teach in the future. So it won't be an elective, it won't be sort of on the margins, it'll be in the mainstream. Well, we have taken a hell of a long time to get to that point. But I think we could also say that's true of the financial and investment worlds, and I think we could say it's true of large parts of business, although we've got some really interesting examples of companies that are not only stepping up, but actually announcing their plans to transform their businesses. And so when I think about the agenda going forward, which is part of what Dan asked me to address, I think we're reaching the end of a 35 to 40 year period where we've all thought about responsibility. We thought about corporate responsibility in terms of transparency and accountability and stakeholder engagement and all of that good stuff, and reporting and supply chain management and so on. And I'm not for a moment going to argue that that is coming to an end. In fact, I think that responsibility agenda is intensifying and expanding. So the COVID-19 crisis has done a number of things, but one of them is push a huge range of new responsibilities onto the business community, and they have to do with, well, wealth divides. I mean, CEOs, some of them at least, are astonishingly well paid. They're part of this phenomenon of where our societies have started to separate out with sort of new types of class structure. So that's on the agenda. Access to public health care and vaccines and so on, a really, really intense issue, and the question of whether companies should share their patents around the world. Tax avoidance, tax evasion, tax havens, that sort of stuff that was buried under a distant part of the carpet for a long time are now really, really pushing to the forefront. But that's only part of what we now have to sort of help, I think, businesses, our own and others, address. So if I do this in 3 hours, if I may, the first one is responsibility. The second one is resilience. And a number of people have been talking about the way in which the urgent push, particularly since globalization, towards efficiency has squeezed out resilience in many cases. And I have very personal experience of that in supply chains in different parts of the world. But now you're starting to hear people, whether they're politicians, whether they're CEOs, whether they're commentators or media people or whatever, talking about resilience and what they mean by that. And it's been shown up in spades by the pandemic. What they mean by that is that the systems on which we depend and rely for our well-being are all starting to wobble. Our economies are wobbling, and if we think that's going to end in a year or two, it's absolutely delusional. We're in a period, a U-bend, where an old order comes apart and a new one starts to self-assemble, and that's a very messy business, and sort of educators are going to have to play into that space. Our societies and communities, our democracies are also really struggling because the roadmaps, the game plans, the rule books they had before are no longer working. And to see, Biden sitting down with Putin, who is just, poisoning half the world population, to put it slightly over dramatically, is just an extraordinary illustration of the world in which we increasingly find ourselves. And then the environment, the natural environment, whether you're talking about the climate emergency, the biodiversity emergency, all of these different things that are starting to feed off each other. And the G7 meeting we've just had in Cornwall, in my own country, the United Kingdom, I found a disappointment. I found a lot of bland statements being made. I mean, what looked like ambitious commitments, but with very few dates, targets, budgets allocated, and so on. We are going to have to do radically better than that. So resilience. Now, there are some people, and I just towards a conclusion, there are some people who think that the best way to achieve resilience is basically to talk about it a lot, and just assume that out of that will come something approaching, sort of robust, increasingly healthy systems. That's not going to work. And the only way I know of achieving system level resilience is to regenerate those systems. And so I think the third R, and we're going to hear a lot more about this in the coming years. Paul Hawken, who many of you will know, has just finished and sent off to the publishers a new book called Regeneration. It comes out in September in the US and October in the EU. It's an astonishing book, and it lays out an agenda, not just for business, for cities, for governments, and so on. So get ready for the regenerative economy. Get ready for everything that comes in terms of requests for new skills, new educational approaches. But Dan, let me stop there and step back a bit and listen to the others.
Perfect. Thank you so much, John. This I'm I guess 100% confident there are many people here that would love to hear you continue along these lines. But we're going to shift into a panel discussion, and we'll come back to you many times to try to tie together some of these ideas. I want to move quickly to John. Now, John, I was going to put you on the spot and take you back all the way to 2002. I was there. I don't think you were there at the time, but when the EFMD put out a manifesto, this is at a global forum. Denita, I remember you were there as well, put out a manifesto that ultimately led to the creation of the Globally Responsible Leadership Institute. But now fast forward about 10 years, another decade, and that's when you and I met on the beach in Rio, right, at Rio Plus 20, right? Putting together benches in the proper formation for 50 plus 20. Could you tell us a little bit about the 50 plus, remind us, I suppose many already know about it, but remind us about the 50 plus 20 vision quickly, but then reflect on, as John did, reflect on our progress so far in just a few minutes.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you also, John, for those opening statements. You've now mentioned Bangkok and the 2002 meeting, which, as you point out, I wasn't at. But I think it may be worth just saying one thing about it from what I know and what I've read about it, which is that when the idea of global responsibility was presented as an ideal, it was presented as something that was to be developed and defined in context and in time. And as we know, context and time changes. So it was never a fixed concept, and it did indeed lead to the development of the GLI. Because it was triggered by this question: how do we develop a next generation of globally responsible leaders? Now, a number of milestones led up to 50 plus 20, and I think it may be worth just saying a few things about those. The question that the original GLI partnership worked with, and this was a task force of 21 corporations and business schools that were jointly selected by EFMD and the Global Compact. The question that they worked with led them and the GLI on a journey. And one of the questions was, what developmental approaches might catalyze the development of global responsibility? Which, of course, led us to the work on whole person learning as an area. In other words, learning that involves and develops the entire human being. And along with that, the recognition that the change that is needed is ultimately required at various levels: the individual, the organizational, and the systemic, or the me, the we, and the all of us, as it's depicted in our logo. One of the later questions that came, and which leads us to the PRME Global Forum today, is what response should the management education ecosystem offer in response to the UN Global Compact's 10 principles, and of course that led to the development of PRME. In 2009, we asked, however, what does a business school look like if people and planet matters? And that was where the 50 plus 20 vision was born. The 50 plus 20 vision, of course, at a very high level, describes 3 roles: developing responsible leaders, as opposed to training managers that serves the current paradigm of business. So that's at the individual level. Enabling companies to serve the common good rather than promote the dominant focus on the financial bottom line at an organizational level. And then engaging proactively in transforming our economic systems, which I think speaks very much to the systemic work that is needed, and which goes, as John suggests, beyond ensuring resilience, but actually regenerating the natural systems that supports our work. So the 50 plus 20 vision described these roles for management education, It also described in the core a collaboratory, which is a model of how, where, and why management education can create impact, because it basically calls for multi-stakeholder, issue-centered research and learning. And I think one of the main things, and I'm sure some of my colleagues will touch on that now, one of the main impacts I believe that we've seen as a result of 50+20 has been both at EFMD in its ECPA standard and also at AACSB in its latest iteration of Standard 9. Some serious moves towards ensuring that quality management education is ultimately about ensuring sustainability, ethical leadership, and responsibility. So I'll pause there.
Thanks for that. I appreciate the segue into Karen because of her work at AACSB, but we're going to put Standard 9 off a little bit for a later discussion. In fact, I appreciate you bringing this up because the way I understand the vision sometimes is that it's to think of business schools as not only trying to be the best in the world, but to be the best for the world. And this quality impact dimension, I think, is pretty important. Karen, your background, your academic background is in ethics and ethical organizations and law. And I'm with 3 deanships under your belt, and I'm wondering, were the schools that you became dean at, were they chosen by you, I suppose? Was the match in part because of your interest in ethics and ethical organizations? Just briefly.
No. That's brief. What you're seeing in my career, and it was interesting that John mentioned that rogue faculty member who's asked to teach. You know, I was in 1985. I was a temporary instructor in business law, hired after someone had left without giving them notice, and I really was going to go back and practice law. And the department head at the time asked me to teach the social responsibility class, only because a lawyer must know something about social responsibility. So it was just a classic. But then I loved academia, and I continued to teach the business ethics and social responsibility classes in all the schools that I've been at until I got to Santa Clara. And I chose Santa Clara for 2 reasons to be the dean there. One, it was in Silicon Valley, which is business on steroids. And the second is because of its focus on the whole person. And being since literally since 1985 in business schools and growing up in business schools, I saw a huge need for business schools to really change what they were doing. My late husband was a scientist and very interested in sustainability, water problems around the world. And so anyway, I appreciated the perspective that he brought to my career, as well as the perspective that I could then turn around to bring to business schools. So no, my career path was not planned, and but it's been a wild ride. And I do think my law and ethics research and background has been a really, really important framing what I do today.
Well, I'm sure those schools came a long way under your leadership in this direction. But let me jump back to your work at AACSB, your long service both in accreditation and on the board and serving as chair. Tell us a little bit about the conversations about or without sustainability that took place over maybe the last decade and a half. Was it a big part of the conversation? And remember, I was there too, so we have some double checking.
From my perspective as a volunteer during that time, it was part of the conversation in some schools and in the organization in general, but I would also think that there are schools where that was not part of the conversation at all. And one of the interesting challenges is when we redid the standards, and we did it 2 years ago, not just for what, for the pandemic, and luckily we did, we really wanted the schools to focus on social impact and societal impact. And reviewing lots of tenure and promotion packets, hundreds of promotion and tenure packets, reviewing, dozens of schools across the globe, it really became clear to me that a lot of what time is being spent in business schools was being spent on talking to ourselves, and not enough time in talking to businesses, and not enough time in engaging in what I would consider to be the world at large. And AACSB really one of our biggest strengths is being a connector and convener for a variety of groups, and not just business schools talking to themselves. And you see that in our new standard, and maybe we'll get to it, but where we really are requiring schools to show their societal impact, not just in their teaching, but in their research as well as in their community engagement. And I'm very excited for it because we spend a lot of time in our careers, all of us do. And if we're not really making an impact on society, I'm not confident in what we're spending our time doing.
I can confirm your perspectives around only a piece of the conversation, but also very much internal. Thanks for that, Karen. Danitza, John North mentioned earlier context, and it's been already, I think, a major part of what we're shaping in terms of the discussion. Take us back to the founding of the Bled School of Management. I was surprised, always surprised that, even from the last time I was there, that 1986, this was before the Berlin Wall fell. This is before Slovenia's constitution. What motivated you to create the Bled School of Management at the time?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me in this panel. I'm very honored. And of course, I like this question too very much. And that was in socialist times still, when in '85, when the word management was not well regarded. I shall not say that it was forbidden, but it was better not to mention it because we had self-management in Yugoslavia. And Yugoslavia was then a socialist country. And I was a director of the Marxist Center. You have to know that. This was helping me a lot because of this way I was not immediately, pointed out as a dissident, but I was somebody who tried to, to make management as a profession. Because we had people in the companies who were leading the companies and they didn't have or education or anything, So I made this, I was asked, in fact, by the president of Chamber of Commerce to make a management school. I was teaching self-management at the university, and I said to myself, I shall try. So I went to a course, my husband, Dutch, so I knew something from the West, He was bringing me to Finland to listen to a conference about management. And on that way, I started to understand what I should do. I brought the faculty from all over the world. I did one good strategic decision, and that was taking the best from the West and leave the rest. I was quite arrogant in this respect. I really brought the best professors from INSEAD. I started then from IMD and others, also from United States, from the best schools. And so I really created something very unusual. But then I saw quickly that, and immediately, I was also teaching ethics at the university. So I immediately started with ethics. After 5 years of having a management school, we were already having as a required subject ethics in our curriculum, which was like one of the first of management schools with ethics. So, I really understood the role of the managers from the beginning, that that they have to be responsible leaders, that they have to care for the society, because this was a little bit connected with socialism still, because factory or company in the village or anywhere else was responsible for the social life in that village, for equality, for all kinds of things. I came from a poor village, and they were buying us even the shoes there and everything else, in the school. But not to be too long, I only wanted to say that soon afterwards, I saw that all other schools, because we were the first one in all Eastern Central Europe. But then it started to appear the second school in Hungary, made by Soros a year later. Then 2 years later, the first Polish school. Then 3 years later, and 5 years later, the Russian schools, So I said to myself, I have to really bring together these schools, and we have to start to communicate and start to do something together to get a bigger impact. And you call it impact, I called it relevance for the society. I think that management schools really played a very important role in this part of the world for the reform, in the reform processes, you know, and we were immediately an international management school. So we were really pioneering, and I am very happy. And since then, you know, I always have also the idea and the wish to help to other schools to create an impact, as you say. And I'm very happy to see ASCSB and EFMD and all other associations, they start in the last years much more to talk about impact than they did for last 20 years, you know. So that's very important, because managers and management associations have unbelievable impact on society. That's why we have to offer them a good education. I think here I should stop.
I appreciate that. I've seen that happen, and this transformation, at least in part, driven by the business schools in the region. And thanks for sharing that bit of history. I want to go back to Johnny, because now you've heard some reflections from your colleagues on the panel, and I know you started with several really big points. One of which was that you've seen remarkably slow progress. And I'm wondering if you've changed in any way your mindset around this progress question. Is it slower or faster than you thought it was?
I think it's got multi-speeds, and I'm impressed by everything that people have said. But again, there is a pattern here, which is that we tend to be seduced by, you know, the sparkling tip of the iceberg, where things are shiny and well considered and so on. So one of the questions that came in from the audience was, how are businesses doing in terms of the expanded responsibility agenda? And I just want to make the connection between your question just now, Dan, and that one, which is that, you know, I love sparkly things. I love the new. I like being sort of engaged with a company that's really trying its level best to reinvent what it does, its business models and all the rest of it. But when you stand back from that sort of work and look at the wider world, that wider world is not as significantly changed as we might imagine. Well, I mean, listening to Danica and that history of Yugoslavia and the companies being responsible for the equity issues and the quality and for the buying of the shoes and so on. Well, that's a different form of responsibility, isn't it? And I think most Western companies would quail at that sort of world. And I think there's going to have to be a set of decisions around how far can we require, in a way, businesses to go in meeting social expectations and needs. Just a final point, you know, I'm immensely excited at the moment because I see a significant number of major companies embracing critical elements of this emerging agenda. So, for example, I don't love Walmart, but Doug McMillon, their CEO, last September, committed the giant retail company to becoming a regenerative business. PepsiCo have talked about regenerating 7 million acres of land, equivalent to their entire land take. Not the same land, though. Unilever has published its regenerative agriculture principles and so on. There is this sea change going on, but we have to be very careful to look behind all of that activity. And yes, they'll influence companies, businesses, and their supply chains. But to sort of close the loop back to where we started, I think the educational system has moved on phenomenally from the sort of world that both I and to some degree Karen painted. But there is still a hell of a lot of work here to be done.
Thanks, John. I'm going to go back to Karen because I know there are a lot of people anxious to hear you talk about Standard 9, right, in the 2020 standards, right? And just to be sure, there are only 9 standards, so this is the last one. So one of the things I want to press you on is this just an afterthought, or is this a game changer in the sense that we think that this will accelerate the process of business schools really contributing, perhaps even helping them move from being followers to leaders in the space of sustainability. Karen, Tell us a
It's
little
not,
bit.
yeah, thanks, Jen. It's not an afterthought. The whole standards, all the standards are built around it. It's interesting, we're using the term learner, back to John's on the baby boomers. Many people think business schools are for a certain age group. Business schools now continue to have people learn, relearn. Lifelong learning is a real thing. And that comes back to the social impact. What can business schools do with all of the types of quality faculty that they have to really make an impact on society? And there's an interesting question on whether or not the accreditation bodies themselves are inclusive or exclusive in the chat. And I think that's an interesting question. We are, AECSB, as I can speak to, we're exclusive in that you have to meet our standards. So we're expecting schools to show societal impact. But we're also inclusive in that schools can have their own mission. So a particular school's mission might be very local, and they're going to impact their local community. Maybe they're going to provide jobs for their local community, or they can be national, or they can be international, but it's very much mission driven. And so we want schools who care about their mission, who think hard about their mission, and who really make an impact in society as they define it. Many of them will define it as sustainability, but it can be others. It can be economic reform. The UN principles actually fit very, very well into what schools are doing, and schools can pick and choose those, but we're not going to prescribe to the schools what their social impact is. But it's a thread throughout the standards. And if accreditation standards do anything good, many people think we're the police and that we don't necessarily do anything good. But if business schools do good things, it'll be because they can now report it and brag about it and really change the way that business schools are viewed and what business schools are viewed as doing. You're muted, Dan.
The system automatically mutes me so that I don't make noise during the rest of the conversation. Thanks for that. Karen, I want to press just a little bit further on one point. It's integrated throughout the standards, of course, and that's really important. But the point John E. mentioned earlier about incrementalism versus regeneration versus innovation. And you know, for a long time, the mantra of accreditation at AACSB was continuous improvement, right? If we just get better every day, then we will continue to improve, right? Not only improve, but make a difference. And I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about this relationship between innovation and accreditation, just quickly.
I think that the pandemic, as horrible as it's been, has been a game changer for business schools in general and higher education. Business schools and higher education went from we can't do it, we're a 600-year-old institution, our policies and procedures have been the same and they've been great for 600 years, to literally reinventing themselves from scratch. Everything from, do we do grades? How are people admitted into class? How do we teach? What does pedagogy mean? What going home? Some of my faculty told me they would never teach online. They taught online in 3 weeks' notice, and they did it pretty well. And in many universities, business schools were the only one who had experience in making changes with their curriculum and making changes in their pedagogy. So we will never go back, because business schools have shown that they can change faster than they thought they could, that they needed to change more quickly than they ever thought they could. And the faculty themselves understand that their experience in supply chain and operations, in finance and communications really makes a difference when you're dealing with a global pandemic. And so we have historically shown incremental change. I think now we're going to show huge leaps. And I spoke a long time, you know this, about disruption. Because of Silicon Valley, I thought it would be technological disruption. Who knew it would be a virus that would disrupt everything? But I'm hoping we all come out of this with an idea that we can do really hard things, and we can do it quickly if we all work together.
Thanks for that. I see that in the standards. There's even a part where it says if you're not innovating as a business school, you're not a quality business school. And I suppose that carries over to the curriculum as well. But I want to turn to John. John, based on taking off from what Karen said, are you seeing this as part of the conversation that you're having with the dean's cohorts? Are they talking about acceleration? Are they talking about innovation, regeneration in the programs and the work that they do?
Yeah, absolutely, Dan. And maybe just a little bit of context on the Dean's Cohort for those of you that are not familiar. In a similar vein to the GRI itself, a cohort is a meeting place for deans and directors that are agents of change. They are peers that hold and work with difficult questions. It's now in its 5th year with more than 100 senior leaders from not only business schools, they're also starting to expand into other areas of academia and business. And in fact, they're busy capturing all their learning and impact on a shared dashboard. But what we see with the Deans and Directors Cohort, and specifically around innovation, is the need for relational innovation. In other words, reconnecting to the self, the other, and the whole. And I'm going to come back to what John Elkington said at the outset. If we're going to regenerate the natural environments, we need to reestablish our connection as humans to our humanity and to that which supports life on Earth. And so we're seeing deans that are asking very interesting questions about, for instance, the SDGs and economic growth. How do we reconcile the for instance SDG 8 with the reality that we have one planet? And within if you look at the impact and learning dashboard of the Deans and Directors Cohort, you'll find things like impact and the 3rd mission, business school leadership, how that's changing, breaking out of silos and reaching beyond the converted, because ultimately we've got a lot of people here that are very much excited about PRME, but there are 15,000 business schools in the world that needs to be reached, right? Empowering student-led global responsibility, and I'm very excited about that upcoming panel where the positive impact rating is being launched or being announced, and as well as deep collaboration. So some of those themes that are keeping the deans awake at night, I believe requires a different type of innovation, which is relational innovations. How do we foster deep engagement and partnership that actually changes the rules of the game, that changes the system? I think sometimes we're very much solution-oriented, and it trips us up, when really what we should be doing is we should continue to ask difficult questions that engages us in the heavy lifting and the work that is required to do.
Thanks, John. I appreciate that. We're getting close. We're about 4 minutes from the end of our time. But I want to just offer Denitza an opportunity to talk about the Sustainability Think Tank. I was just on your website not that long ago, and I want to make sure we talk about the innovation that you're leading at BLED before we go back to Johnny, and then I'm going to ask everyone for 20-second closing remarks. Please, Denitza.
Yeah, I think that innovations is not only, there's typical innovation concerning the curriculum, concerning sustainability, but we try to innovate and bring the ideas and the truth through the art. And we are, I believe, in cutting edge with art in the world. In our school, we want to develop leaders that see more, hear more, and feel more. And we want to have leaders who are more critical, more reflective, more creative. And so through art, through films, through music, you can do that much better and much more persuasively than in other ways. And also we made a great program on sustainability journey program, which is absolutely something new, even from the brochure and so on, where we are having the course of 12 days on some hours per day, 2 hours only. But then, we make a kind of community where people are staying, and, and we continue to work on these issues. So my main task, and here I shall finish, is my main task during the COVID was to reinvent a little bit the methodology of teaching, how to make high-touch education through high-tech, again, high-touch. So how to make it more interesting, how to make it more emotional, etc., and more convincing. That is my
Thanks, Denise. John E., back to you. If you could just tell us very quickly about the Green Swans Observatory, because this to me seems a really strong connection between the work that you're doing in business schools and universities.
Well, thank you, Dan. Last year, I published a book called Green Swans, The Coming Boom in Regenerative Capitalism. One of the things that happened as I went around the world, and I did about 150 virtual keynotes since that book came out, is that people kept saying, love the book, but I'm operating in this geography, this sector, these are my challenges, give me some case studies there. So the Observatory, which we've just soft launched about 2 weeks ago, is to start to populate that, start to provide some of that background case study material for people, but they're living case studies. These aren't simply where we pop in and then leave. These are organizations that we watch over quite some time. Really keen to work with other educational institutions. So that's it. So thank you.
Dan.
Very quickly, moving around the table, we want to close up, leave room for the new positive impact rating announcement that comes right after this. Karen, one word to sum up what you take away from this conversation.
It's time to move. It's the great reset according to Davos, and I think we all are resetting, and now we need to exponentially grow and get better at what we were doing.
Thanks, Karen. John, North.
I'm going to say work beyond the ego and the logo. There was a little quote in 50+20. We've been competing like mad to become the best in the world. Let's collaborate to be the best for the world.
Thanks, John. Denitsa.
I just would like to say that we should really, with accreditations, with special schools for teaching teachers, etc., make our best to have more teachers on sustainability and to have more, better education, etc. We could do much more.
Great, thanks, Denitsa. We started with you, John E. We'll end with you. Last remarks?
Oh, no, well, let me try. How exciting. It's really lifted my mood, no end. I'd like to be in touch with all of you, but well done today. And back to you, Dan.
Thanks so much.